Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this fourth in a series of shared learning events for Alliance 16. My name's Mark, and I'm joined today by Andy, Nick, and Sharon in the chat room. Before we go into introducing our guest speaker, I'm just going to hand over to Andy for some important messages.
Hi, good afternoon all. Just a little bit from me about how we've been running the meetings and how we propose to run them today. So if when talking, if we could have the cameras on, that would be really helpful so that we can see who we're talking to. And then when not talking, if we could just ask people to mute so that we just don't get that background noise, that would be really helpful because we've been getting quite a lot of people on these sessions. With regard to questions, we'd really like to invite people to comment and ask questions in the chat box. But we'll run a short Q&A session at the end so that we can take questions at that point. That just ensures that we get through the slides set in a timely way and complete the session in a timely way. And then we will obviously share this recording once we've finished today. So that's it from me, Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. So as well as a very kind, decent and wise man, our guest speaker today is also our Regional Clinical Director for ESIST in the East of England region. Dr Amit Arora is also a practicing geriatrician at the University Hospitals of North Midlands. Amit, thank you so much for taking time to spend with us today and share your thoughts on transformation in frailty. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Andy and Nick. But I'm going to actually talk about my own journey to some extent, and we are going to talk about improvement. And I think it's always really good to start with why. We all have to find our own why. My why is to make a difference. My why is because I take pride when I do good work, and I feel good when I see a better outcome for patients or a system. That's why I became a doctor. I would like you to think, what is your why? This is for you to think, really. I think others can tell us about what and how and what to do things and how to do things, but we all need to think of our own why. But why is this why so important? Because beyond serving to tell you what kind of goals and tasks you should be pursuing in the first place, knowing why you are doing your work serves two fundamentally important efficiency related purposes. First, it motivates you, and two, it orients you. And hold this thought because we will be asking you regarding this why a bit later towards the end of this session. So keep this in mind for now. Next slide, please. So frail older people are the fastest growing cohort attending the emergency departments. Next slide, please. And therefore, acute frailty service redesign is crucial to deliver high quality, sustainable health care. So what is frailty? Frailty is a loss of resilience. That means that people living with frailty do not bounce back quickly after a physical or a mental illness, an accident, or other stressful event. Now, this then results in difficulty recovering from stressor events such as an infection or a change in medication, a place of residence change, or even ward moves in the middle of the night. Older people, frail people also deteriorate rapidly. They improve slowly. They respond differently to medication, and they have different medico-social needs. So it's not just medicine, it's medicine plus more. This actually means that they need more medical input, that at times they are at a higher risk of admission and readmission, and they need integrated services delivered to them at their doorsteps. And this is why older people are so different and so important. Next slide, please. So we know that our population is aging, and we all of us in this world together, right at this, are all on that demographic escalator. We are all aging together. Whereas aging does not really mean frailty. Not all older people are frail, but frailty is more commonly seen in older people. And the prevalence and impact of frailty is likely to increase. So the overall prevalence of frailty in people aged above 60 is 14%, 14%, which is quite a high number, even in those aged 60 and above. So, but if you are 60 to 69, 5% of those people will have frailty, and this rises to 65% in people aged above 90. And this frailty results in large increases in the health costs for care settings, whether it is inpatient, outpatient, care homes, etc. Next slide, please. And this, as we all grow older, one thing which we have noted is that the progress on life expectancy has actually stalled, and we are now living longer portions of our lives with disability. This then puts more challenges in how to reorganize our services for older people, but also for older people themselves to live with this disability. And the challenge really is to have more disease-free, disability-free years added to our lives. Next slide, please. But it should not always be about money only. And to be quite honest, how a country looks after its older people is a measure of that country's societal barometer. And apart from money, we all have a societal responsibility to get this care of frail older people right. Next slide, please. So so one of the things is that we all need to do in our own patches, in our own areas, hospitals, but more importantly, the systems, the areas where we work in, is to develop a vision for what care of frail older people looks like. And I've deliberately used the word people and not patients in this setting, because I think that kind of mindset is really, really important, and it does fit in well with the new national vision around aging well, which I'll come to a bit later on. But I think in doing this, we need to be mindful of the evidence reviews, the needs analysis, the health inequalities that have been highlighted during COVID times. We need to use the principles of population health management. We need to have a stakeholder engagement. We need to have a different outcomes framework, implementation plans, followed by feedback from various stakeholders, the assessment of the impact of the changes, and an ongoing evaluation. So lots of stuff which puts all these building blocks in place. So next slide, please. But one of the key important things to do this is to knowing if you are working in a hospital, and I'm aware that most of us in this chat today are from a hospital type setting, we really need to know, and do you know, who is in your beds? So in this next section, I'm going to discuss some of the service changes that we have developed over the last few years. So going back to the why, people in this group today, some of us will be planners, some will be strategists, some will be clinicians, some managers, some in other professionals. But we are all leaders, and that's why we are here. And that's why it makes us important to realize that we need to be part of this journey of change, of transformation, of development. And we all may be in different phases of our transformation journeys, and some may be better than others in certain areas. So do pick up what you need from the various services that exist in either my own patch or patches across the country, because some of these stuff is now widely prevalent across the country. Many of them are in the developing phase, some are more developed than others. But do ask where you need support, where you need signposting, and if you need to know the know-how of it. And we can easily signpost you to the right services, the right resources, the right kind of contacts. So our journey, my journey, started some 6-7 years ago, and we started with the identification of frailty. We surveyed the whole hospital apart from the intensive care, pediatrics, and maternity. And what we found was that 65% of patients in an acute hospital, in most acute hospitals, were above the age of 65 years, of which 50% of these were classed as frail patients, and 50% of those were not on a designated frailty elderly care beds. this actually means that they were potentially devoid of specialist input from elderly care. This also meant that we needed to increase the flow from the hospital and make other changes so we can serve more frail patients, as bed base was always a finite number to be. So really, really important to know who is in your bed.
I think you've gone to mute there, Amit.
Can I have the next slide, please? So how do we identify which person is frail? So there are lots of ways to do that. The common way that we used was the clinical frailty scale, which is a visual scale. And although the first couple of identification, couple of patients might take 10 minutes or so, as we get experienced in this, it only takes about 1 minute from a non-clinical person who can easily define somebody as frail, non-frail, and allocate them to a scale, whether it is a scale from 1 to 9, where 1 is very fit and 9 is a terminally ill person. Next slide, please. Of course, the 4-meter walking speed test also detects frailty, and it also predicts the future in terms of disability, long-term care, falls, and mortality. Next slide, please. And in primary care, the GPs are using the electronic frailty index, which also diagnoses frailty, but this is based on a cumulative deficit model, but it can actually define which people are fit, which people have got mild, moderate, or severe frailty. But what it also does, it also guides that the people who are mild frail will benefit from supported self-management. People who are moderately frail will benefit from care and support planning, whereas people who are severely frail will probably benefit more from individual case management as well as end-of-life care. Next slide, please. It actually does identify what the prevalence is, what is the mortality, and what is the 5-year mortality in these various categories. So it's quite a useful tool. In hospital settings, we currently have found that the clinical frailty scale is a better scale to be used, but in the primary care, there is the electronic frailty index. Next slide, please. So once you have identified the person that this is a frail person, what happens? So what we did was we've inserted an alert on the in-hospital reporting system. Locally we call it as iPortal. You may have a different computer system which identifies patient results, etc. So if you see at the top left-hand corner, there is a red triangle, and if you click the red triangle, it will demonstrate whether there is a person who has got an alert, which might be of a frailty alert, which might be of a MRSA or Clostridium difficile or ESBL or a cancer alert or acute kidney alert, etc., acute kidney injury alert, etc. What that frailty flag will do then is it will identify the frail person on which we need to then do a comprehensive geriatric assessment. So it's like a trigger for a comprehensive geriatric assessment. And more recently, it is also being used to be alert for completion of a RESPECT document. So whereas comprehensive geriatric assessment is the evidence-based intervention which keeps patients longer in their own homes, RESPECT documentation is another tool to prompt anticipatory care planning, which is one of the highlights of the Aging Well plan. And I'll come back to this in a minute. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the next step we kind of did was to maintain a frailty register. So we then have a frailty register in which at a glance we can see how many patients we have seen, how many frail patients are in the hospital at any given time, how many times they have been readmitted, etc. So this data has been proven to be really, really useful to us. And the next one, next slide, please. And eventually all this then translates into a Frailty dashboard, which can give you exactly what you want to see in your data. And I think one of the important things about data is that the data should be what the clinicians want to see to improve their service, and not just the data that we need to submit for various board meetings or to the various national asks. I think, to me, ask your clinicians what data they want to see, what is meaningful to them, what can they do with this, and what improvements they might want to make from that kind of data that they get. Ask them what they like to see. And there is a difference between the floor performance, which is more regulatory, and the aspirational performance, which is more about improvement. Whereas the regulatory compliance and assurance is important, so is transformation and so is improvement work. Because these three, all the work differently, these three are all really, really important arms and serve a unique purpose for all of us to really work together. So data is absolute key. And I think if we don't have anything, then data is a good starting point. So what did we do with our data? Next slide, please. So within a few months of that data, and this is going back a few years, we actually demonstrated to them that we can make significant progress. We reduced our hospital length of stay, we increased the throughput, we reduced the mortality, and we were quite surprised by it. And also we increased the income that we used to get, and this was the payment by result days, not the block contract days. So next slide, please. And actually what this did was it put us in a really good position within the hospital as well as the healthcare system. So I'm going to now move on to the next section of my journey, our journey together. And I'm going to move to a story, which is not an uncommon story. And many of you will probably think that you know a patient like this. So I'm going to talk about Mr. A. So Mr. A is a frail elderly man. He lives on his own. He is off balance for the last few weeks. He did not seek much medical attention, partly due to the pandemic, has been unsteady. The family included the daughters who were regularly visiting inside the bubble, and they were helping with shopping and cooking, etc., etc. And one fine evening, this man has a fall. He rings 999, brought to the emergency department. He's to the acute medical unit. Not an unfamiliar story here. I probably see it almost every day. He's diagnosed as a UTI, goes off balance, is treated with usual antibiotics, fluids, etc., and goes home in about 4 days' time. 2 weeks later, he gets readmitted to the hospital with further falls. This time he's weak and he's moved to a transition bed after 5 days of treatment on an acute ward. From that transition ward, he was moved to a community bed for so-called rehabilitation in some places, from where he is then discharged after 21 days with a care package. He does not cope well at home, gets back into the assessment bed in a care home once he has the next fall, and from that fall, from that care home, he does not return home. That Mr. A was an old patient. He was frail. He had very little support at the time. At the age of 30, I myself underwent an emergency appendicectomy. And many of you know a patient or a person who is known in your own personal lives who may have gone to the hospital. But when I went to the hospital, I was told to have some bed rest, 7 to 10 days of bed rest. After 10 days, whereas before the operation, I could easily run for a cardiac arrest call, I was hardly able to walk myself. 10 steps to the door of the house, and I would get tired, I would get out of breath, and I won't be able to walk. So it took me almost a month to actually gain my strength again. I did not understand it, what had happened to me at the time, and I thought, oh, it was just the effect of the surgery. But it wasn't really. It was that despite my youth, despite my energy, despite the enthusiasm, I just physically was not able to do things that I was previously able to do. And many of you will actually know a patient or a person like this. It could be a relative, it could be a patient, it could be a friend, it could be a family member. So I want you to think about this. Do you know of somebody who might have experienced this, that they went into the hospital better than at the time of discharge? While in the hospital, they were less able to perform their activities of daily living, and that persisted after the discharge. And this can also lead to premature care home admission, apart from other issues as highlighted in this poster, such as falls, pressure sores, dehydration, reduced mobility, malnutrition, depression. That's what can happen in the hospital if you're not active enough. These harms of inappropriately prolonged hospital stay, they not just include the conventional safety incidents like the DVT, the PE, the drug-related harms, but over the last few years, a new clinical entity has been highlighted. This is widely now known as deconditioning syndrome. And in fact, this is probably one of the most underreported, most underrecognized, most underaddressed challenge of hospitalizations in frail older people. There is a well-developed scientific evidence base of changes that happen in human body, from muscle wasting to reduced lung capacity and so on. And it's really important to note that deconditioning can start to happen within a few hours of being immobile in that trolley in the emergency department. And in older people, it is often rapid, severe, and can often be irreversible. And one real key way to address this in our hospitals is to encourage patients to sit up in the chair, dressed in their own clothes, get ready, sit up, get dressed, and keep moving. Encourage them to assist them to mobilize, take part in activities of daily living, encourage them to go to the toilet, encourage them to wash and bathe themselves, encourage them to shave themselves, change themselves, dress themselves, cut their own food, eat without assistance where we can. And I'm not talking about not looking after older people in the hospital, but there is a way of looking after, and there is a way of supporting them in looking after themselves. And in this process, I think if we can avoid that common phenomenon of deconditioning, it will actually really help the individual patients as well as the systems that we work in. And we really need our hospitals to be elder friendly. The acute hospitals should be for acute treatment. The repair should really happen at home. And that nicely brings me to the D2A work that we've been able to do in our patch. So can I have the next slide, please? So traditionally, due to, next slide, please. So traditionally, due to the intersectoral boundaries, we in the NHS have really struggled to get patients discharged in a timely manner. But during COVID, due to the discharge policy, which was then supported by the increased funding and partly because of the need to make the spaces in the hospitals, we saw real great progress in D2A nationally. And during the process, we actually managed to understand the potentially avoidable harms that we might be causing to our patients in the hospitals when we could have discharged them sooner. And as a consultant, I think one of the most important decisions I make or we make for a single patient is to send patients or recommend patients to go. And we need to understand why such of a decision is so important for the patient. And once we start to understand the importance of those decisions, I think we start getting the results. And we started with why. And every time I tell a patient that he or she can go home, that smile, that handshake, that expression that I get is the reason why we do this. So it's really important. Okay, if we can move to the next slide, please. So I'm going to move fast forward now, and I'm going to move it what we could have done differently for Mr. A. And this is inspired from various service developments across the country. But I think this is what probably good looks like to me. So Mr. A is now living at home. He is mildly confused. He is got a reduced oral intake. He has a carer. The carer has been trained to be frailty aware through various courses. Uh, and remember that the current group of carers are not always fully trained in either detecting frailty or knowing what they can do or signposting, etc. So this carer, who is now trained to be frailty aware, alerts the community team. In future, there might be a digital contact as well. The community team increases the monitoring in their own home, advised to drink more, etc. Doesn't always go really, really well. This chap falls again, and a strong smell of urine is reported. The community team rings 111. This is then linked to an urgent community response team, which has a national target of response within 2 hours of the first contact. This person is then treated at home with oral antibiotics and a temporarily enhanced care package, all at home without the need of going into the hospital. The urgent community response teams, which have been developed in various organizations, various ICSs, are variable. Some of them are equipped with intravenous fluids equipment, ready course of antibiotics, not just a prescription, because for a lot of such patients, going and fetching a prescription from your local pharmacy may not be an option. They are equipped with nebulizer. Some have got point of care testing. Some have got monitoring equipment. Some have got off the shelf care packages. Some of them have got therapist equipment, supply of Zimmer frame, lifeline, a lot of things which are commonly used and commonly prescribed to older people traditionally by way of hospital admission. So if all this can be done in the community, and it's a national program, and there is funding allocated to various settings for this kind of stuff, and this community responder is then supported by a consultant remotely for reassurance. So we have a service in which we have a morning board round, all virtually, all remotely, over a telephone consultation for about half an hour, and then at 5:30 in the evening we again meet up and discuss any difficult patients. And in between during the day, there might be a couple of patients. Yeah. So all this is in a virtual ward scenario where the community staff can monitor for up to 5 days. The general practitioner is made aware through that enhanced integrated care records. And I mentioned about the national priorities. So there are 5 major changes to the NHS service model to be brought over the next 5 years. So what are these? The first one is boost out of hospital care, which is around the urgent community response that we spoke about. The second one is the redesign and reducing pressure on emergency hospital services, which again fits in well with the urgent community response services. The next one is people getting more control over their own health, and that links into with the personalized care. So really, really important for older people. And when it comes to anticipatory care, I'll mention this again. And then the fourth work stream is around digitally enabled primary and outpatient care. With the fifth one is the local NHS organizations will increasingly focus on population health. And we kind of built this into our initial frailty strategy documentation. But what it means for older people is that there are 3 national priorities. The first one relates to a change in approach to health and social care nationally. The second one relates to preventing poor outcomes through active aging. That links in with the deconditioning bit. And then the third bit is the quality improvement in existing acute and community services, where all this service development improvement work, the role of ESIST, the role of Alliance 16, all this comes in. Can I have the next slide, please? So going back to going back to our Mr. A story, in the revisited Mr. A story, this person has now been under the urgent community response team for a few days, 3 to 5 days. And at the time of discharge, Mr. A is referred to as staying well or a aging well or a living well clinic. And this may have different names in your area. And if you don't have, we can signpost you to development of these. But these are, again, multidisciplinary team clinics from NHS England. The ones which we have are supported by a doctor, a pharmacist, a therapist, a voluntary sector person to signpost them to various allowances and benefits and to signpost them to various charities, a person from social care and a person from dementia nursing, because a lot of our patients do have coexisting dementia. So as we move on, medication optimization has made Mr. A feel much better. A short electronic comprehensive geriatric assessment has now been done, and the anticipatory care plan has been agreed in line with what matters to me, what matters to the patient. And today is what matters to me day, so it's worth a mention here. All these documents are shared. There is no duplication, and Mr. A has, can we move to the next slide, please? Mr. A has now continued to live at home for another 6 months, and one Friday night he falls again. And he has pain in his hip, and he cannot stand, and he cannot walk. He rings 111, which then rings directly to the ambulance team, the ambulance team has now alerted the Frailty front door team in emergency department. The Frailty front door team, like for example, our Frailty front door team has seen 12,000, 13,000 patients already in the last few years. And in the ambulance sector, there are lots of great developments happening at the moment. And it means some of them include directly directing these patients straight into the frailty units or making contact with video phones and using direct advice from the specialist teams and managing many of these patients at home. And if they need to be brought into the hospital, then managed by the Frailty front door team, who will directly to the frailty units, etc. And what it does do is it generates a sense of confidence, it generates urgency to the care of older people, but it also has other benefits. So in my own organization, we used to have 3, 4, 5 different clerkings of the patient, such a wasted opportunity for 4 or 5 doctors to take the same kind of history, put the same kind of notes. It takes a lot of time. So now we could easily have one detailed clerking, and we can always supplement onto the details mentioned by the paramedics. So this person now comes home, comes to the frailty ward, and within 24 hours, has now been assessed by the elderly care consultant, the occupational therapist, the physiotherapist. The care package has been revisited. The pain relief has been optimized, and enhanced D2A package means that the person has been given the right kind of support to be discharged home within 24 hours. Can I see the next slide, please? So while he was in the hospital in the first 24 hours, what are the major things that we can actually do to make that journey better, faster, smoother, safer? So following the ward round processes, which include the senior medical reviews, the board rounds, the expected date of discharge documentation, the clinical criteria for discharge documentation, improving the flow by 10 o'clock in the morning, early discharges, and regular standard patient reviews can also be done. It's really important to have an escalation mechanism in your own organization. If things are not moving, who do you escalate to and how do you escalate? And then it's really important to have those internal professional standards for response times, whether it is for a medical review, surgical review, a CT scan, or an echocardiogram, or whatever else that might be. But what is really useful, and we found this really handy, is setting up the rapid access clinics as a backup. So any patients who are going home or any patients who are being highlighted by the paramedic or the intermediate care team can be seen within the rapid access clinic within 24 to 48 hours, avoiding the need for hospital admissions. There is a facility for a consultant direct hotline, which the paramedic or the GP or the intermediate care team can also ring the consultant directly. But what is really, really useful is in some areas there is a silver helpline, I started my own silver helpline within the hospital about 6 years ago, and this is for patients and relatives for post-discharge queries, whether it is related to any change of medication or the care package hasn't arrived or whatever. And then through that silver helpline, we can direct the call to the right kind of teams. Next slide, please. So by bringing about all these changes, we actually improved our relationship and visibility in other departments in the hospitals, the emergency department, the acute medical units, the surgical teams, etc. And by doing this, we were suddenly transformed from a Cinderella specialty to a major force, where the others understood the important role, the geriatricians, the elderly care team, the front door team, the frailty team, whatever name you use, we can play in not just flow, but transformation, but improvement as well. So we are, as a result, we are now sought after. We have a seat on a major table. We are participants, active participants in any significant decisions, whether it is COVID related or whether it is related to other things. And more importantly, we are respected for what we do. And the interesting aspect of all this is that this does not actually take huge amount of time. It in fact saves a lot of money and is not really rocket science. It's easily doable. I think the workforce one is probably the hardest one. And what we kind of did, we did simple things. I mean, I asked for a fridge, I asked for a microwave, I asked for a space for our registrars to go in, and all these things kind of started to make them feel better. They got a good experience. And I think that the team is now a force to reckon with. So we've talked about what looks good in a hospital setting, but what also looks good in community setting, because we are working in an integrated manner. We can't focus only on just on hospitals. The change has to happen throughout the integrated care system. And we have a lot of facilities in the community. We just need to know what those facilities are. Where are the active partners, whether it is the social care, the voluntary sector, the care homes, ambulance services, GPs, etc. And we need to kind of build that collective group which will work together and make those changes together. Next slide, please. And one of the key things in doing this is to mapping your services. Do you really know what your community services are in the hospital? When we work in the hospitals, we are focused mainly on the hospital. We don't think what might be safely and efficiently be able to be done in the out of hospital settings. And I'll give you my own recent example. A patient who was known to me, I went to see them on a Saturday evening because this person had fallen. So I did what I needed to do, did some laceration type bandaging, and I came. I asked the daughter to look after the patient over until Monday, and on Monday, I rang the hospital team. The hospital team said to me that, well, this person has now gone home, is at home, we can't do anything. I rang the discharge to assess team, and they said, well, again, the same story, it didn't happen. I rang the frailty front door team, and I said, well, if the person was in the emergency department, we could have done something, but at the moment we can't take the referrals. Eventually, I ended up ringing the team leader myself, and I said, well, this is a problem, can you fix it? So I think it's really important to know who can fix it, who do you escalate to, what to escalate, and when to escalate. This particular problem was fixed within about 48 hours. But I think what actually really happened then is 7 days later, I was doing a board round. And during the board round, a lady who I didn't know came in and spoke with the ward clerk and the discharge facilitator that any patient where you need an occupational therapist or a social work assessment or a physiotherapy assessment after discharge or before discharge, this is the number. So a common number was generated. So I think it's really important to know who to escalate it to. And on this occasion, this lady did not know that I was the one who had raised this query with the team leader, but the team leader took responsibility and changed the system within a week. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, please. I think with the demographic changes and the evidence base about what the geriatricians do in our various roles, we will never get enough geriatricians. And one common challenge I am faced with is, or question that I'm faced with when we do visits in other places, is we don't have geriatricians. And I know that most people in this group will also say the same, that we don't have enough geriatricians. I think I think you do need geriatricians to provide that clinical expertise, that governance, training, liaison, that umbrella cover, etc. But I don't think we can wait for our services to develop to an extent that we will have enough geriatricians. So I think if we develop our services to make them more attractive, we might attract more. But in the meantime, we should make good use of our junior medical staff, our senior nursing staff, our ACPs to develop their own geriatricianly skills. So I would suggest that you may or may not have enough geriatricians, but you will always have people who can develop their geriatricianly skills, and that's what I would go for. Okay, next one.
Just a polite 5-minute warning, Amit.
Yeah. So the key learnings from me were that, okay, people actually do want to work together. It's just our system barriers, our traditional organizational boundaries between primary care, secondary care, social care, the voluntary agencies, assisted living. I think as leaders, it's our job to actually blur those traditional boundaries, really. Start small, think big, but be quick, and don't wait for perfection. Perfection is the enemy of good. Start somewhere, just do it. And if you're doing the right thing, people will follow. Going back to myself, I don't think I'm not a born leader. I'm much real shy introvert at heart. It takes me a lot of effort to come to a webinar like this and speak. I call myself as an accidental leader, but I learned loads during my journey. I learned loads from my colleagues from ESEST. They developed me into a leader, into a person, into a better person. But one thing I'm sure is that if I can do it, anybody can do it. I'm going to leave you with a few useful links. Can I have the next slide, please? We know that no one system is perfect. Some may be better than others. And what may be great for your system may not be the best solution for other system. But the above services, the BGS Silver Book, the Beneficial Changes Program, the NHS benchmarking audits, the Acute Frailty Network, all these places you can get reliable, useful information and resources. But by all means, contact your local ESIST colleague, email me directly, or DM us on Twitter, etc. And we are there to help. Okay, next paragraph, please. So we started with this slide, and I think going on to the next slide, our healthcare systems are not really designed for care of older people. We do really need those elder-friendly hospitals. This is the queue from my own hospital, which nobody likes. We don't want those queues in the emergency departments. We want our patients to be sat out in the chair, getting dressed in their own clothes and going back home. Next slide, please. And I'll leave you with some images. Some of them are familiar to you, and these, at least one of them on the top right, is one of my own patients, 180-year-old lady who was who surprised me because she was reading on her Kindle. And that is what I would say, that living longer and aging better is the aim. This is yet to come. But with Alliance 16, with ESIS support, we've got a huge opportunity, and the time is now. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll be moving on to some Menti questions. So I'll be grateful if you can help with those questions to us.
Amit, thanks so much for that. That's an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. So much rich information coming forward from now. I'm sure everybody would have found that really, really interesting. So we've got a really quick interactive session. We want your feedback. We want to get some thoughts from you. So if you've got your mobile phone with you, if you don't mind, sort of turn on your camera on your mobile phone and scan the QR code on the screen in front of you. That should open up the Menti session on your mobile phone. Okay, so we've got 50 people in the room at the moment, so we should be looking for about 50 odd people on the call to be answering our questions. So if you log in now, just give me a little nod at the bottom. You'll see like some little thumbs up or thumbs down, or if you feel like you're a bit of a Batman today, you can be Batman if you want to be Batman. Just to let us know that you're all here before I move us on. Brilliant. Okay, so you're all logged in. If you're on a PC, you can also use the menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen as well if you'd rather use a laptop or another PC. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to the first question that Amit has asked us to share with you. The first one, so who's in the room today? Who have we got around us today in the room? Doctors, nurses, AHPs, management, others captures everything, doesn't it, I suppose, after that, but I mean, I fall into another, so I'm there with other. Okay, so nice mix across the room. Nice. All right, Amit, is that what you're expecting from the room? Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. So we've got 26 responses so far, so that's great. So I'm just going to move on to the next question then. So Amit talked about your why. Why, what is it that gets you out of bed in the morning? What is it that drives you? What's your why? You got some free text here. You can just put this in there. So just put it whatever you think. Don't overthink this. It's whatever you often what's in your gut. What tells you the right thing to do? That's brilliant. Make tomorrow a better day. That's a brilliant. Whoever wrote that, well done. That's a brilliant why. Patient care, brilliant. Yeah, make things better. Make life better. Yeah, this is really good. These are proper whys. Obviously, you've all read Simon Sinek's work. When people talk about hitting targets or hitting certain numbers, that's not a why. That's just an outcome of your why. So what you're capturing here is really, really good. Enabling people to get the most out of their day. Yeah, this is our motivation, isn't it? This is what, as I said, this is what gets us out of bed in the morning. So a few more seconds on that one. Any more? Should see that scrolling down. There we can see that scrolling down there. Earn money. Yeah, well, we'll have to earn money. It's all part of our daily lives. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to the next question that we have. Okay, so on your phone, you've got a question around the experiences you've had, and I haven't written it all out here, but on your phone you'll be able to read it. It says, do you know of any patient, family or friend whose functional abilities to perform activities of daily living were lesser at the time of a discharge when compared with pre-hospitalisation days, as in deconditioning? What's your experience of this? Okay, so it's really clear. We all the story that Amit was talking about with Mr. A. It's really clearly we all recognize that, don't we? Again, Amit, is that something you'd expect to see?
Yes, quite a common feature in most hospitals. Deconditioning, it's happening right now in most hospitals, and we just need to find the right kind of strategy by which we can avoid that deconditioning.
Thank you.
Good responses. Thank you for that.
Excellent. So moving on to the next question, a couple more left. On a scale of never to always, and I think it's 1 to 5, just mark where you are around the use of these various methods. So use of a frailty identification tool, what's the score, frailty recognition, frailty dashboard, routinely using a frailty dashboard or frailty register. If never has come up in any of those, just a really simple question: would you be interested in any of our help from an ESIS perspective? So just pop a score on there. Okay, so lots of use of the frailty identification tool, not so much around the frailty dashboard or the frailty register, and quite a lot of interest in a bit of help, Amit. It looks like you're going to be busy. Brilliant. So just a few more seconds on that one then, before we move on to the last question. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. This is really helpful for us to get an understanding about where everybody's at as well on a more national perspective. Okay, yeah. So thanks so much for that. Excellent. So we're going to move us on to the last question. So what are your key challenges? So this is a word cloud. You just put a word or a couple of words in. What are your key challenges out there, Mike, relating to this subject? I haven't talked about workforce. I don't put words in your mouth, but is it workforce? Is it resources? Is it time? What is it? Is it buy-in? Is it engagement from other people? What do you see as your key challenges? So again, engagement funding is looking quite strong. Any thoughts on this as you see this coming forward?
Yes, absolutely. Exactly what I thought will be coming out. So time, funding, engagement, money.
The competing priorities is an interesting one, Nick, isn't it? Particularly during the kind of pandemic.
I think where you got any kind of sense of priorities, it's where's the sense? Is there a sense of urgency around this? Is there a known sense of urgency? Or is so clear there's a feeling there that other things are more important, than this. And I think it's how do we create that argument and that narrative that puts this above, other things. So yeah, it's at the moment you can see where that happens right across the board. A bit of community interaction there. Integration, I think, is another one as well. How do we bring it together as a system rather than just individual component parts of the system? As Amit was saying, all the things that we do in a hospital, there is no reason why we can't do that. Some of that, or at least most of it, in the community for patients who don't even need to come into hospital in the first place. Amit, did you want to answer that?
I mean, my parents live 4,000 miles from here. I regularly FaceTime them, and I diagnose their own medical conditions. Sometimes I might even advise them to buy a tablet from the shop somewhere. And if I can do that for my own parents, why can't we do it for our patients on the phone, on FaceTime, or virtual wards, or rest tech, and so on? So I think the opportunity is huge, and the time is really now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amit. So I think that's the last question. Yes, so thanks very much for that. I'm going to hand back to Andy, and you're going to take us through the last bit of the session.
Thank you, Nick, and a huge thank you to you, Amit, as always, for that engaging presentation. Brilliant. We're going to open up the floor for questions shortly. I'm just going to take us over to Sharon, who's been monitoring the chat room. Sharon, can I come to you? Any questions in the chat room that we can put to Amit now?
Hello. No questions, but just comments going on around the scale, the frailty scale. If anybody could share some light on that, present some clarity, I think that would be helpful for some people.
Yes, so I think the clinical frailty scale is only a start, and it's not the final word on frailty, but it's a reasonable start. I think we have to be careful about how we use the clinical frailty scale, and it's not. I mean, a person who is frail does not really mean even when they are like at the top end of the frailty scale, the 7, 8, and 9. That doesn't mean about end of life, for example. That still means that we can do other things that might be beneficial for the patient. So it's just I think this is what we have at present. I'm sure there is a lot more work happening on this at the moment, but I think it's a reasonable start. But lots more needs to be done around the clinical frailty scale, and it may well be that we might come up with a different scale in the future, which meets the needs of our populations.
Just on that, Amit, I think Rachel Brady asked the question around clinical frailty scale. Understanding that this is for age 65 plus, is there an equivalent scale to identify for under 65?
I think there's lots of work going on around that.
Okay, yeah, and I think that when you get a chance to review the chat box, Amit, I think Simon Conroy's commented on that as well, helpfully.
Yeah, we'll go through the chat later. Yeah, mine doesn't work in too many areas at present.
No, I know that feeling, Amit. I certainly know that feeling. So I guess that covers the chat box. Just to open up to the room, then, really, does anybody have any questions that they want to put to Amit? If we could just take a kind of virtual hands-up approach, we can do it in that way. That would be helpful. Any questions?
I think while people are thinking about this, I think that what comes to mind is that the frailty scale, and whichever we use, is largely to signpost, to trigger certain things, to change that thinking in the mind, to get that data, which then leads us to do different things, if that makes sense. It's not just about making a decision based on what the clinical frailty scale says, where the patient fits in, but it's more about frailty awareness. It's not just about the teams in elderly care departments knowing about frailty. It's important for surgeons, for anesthetists, for emergency clinicians, for receptionists, for ward clerks, everybody to know about the frailty, because it's important, because the behaviors could change and it can actually influence the behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Amit. It does make sense, and I absolutely agree with you. We don't have any hands up. I think it's probably down to the presentation being so full. Really, it was an excellent presentation, Amit. So we have no hands up, and we're nearly at the hour mark. So can I come back to you?
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and my thanks as well, Amit. I mean, some of the comments in the chat room, one from Lindsay Saunders at the Royal Free, saying how wonderful, inspiring she felt your presentation was, and how lucky your staff are to work alongside you. And I can certainly echo that. Thank you very much indeed. It was I particularly liked your use of the patient stories, that made the whole thing very compelling. So thank you again. Our next shared learning event is on the 23rd of June, and we're going to be hearing from Dr. Dan Bowden, who's the National Clinical Advisor for A&E. Dan's going to be talking to us about the use of News 2 in terms of admission avoidance, but also in terms of peer review. So again, just from Andy, Nick, Sharon, Amit, and myself, thank you very much for giving up your time today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you very much.